When discussing the inner workings of an organization, it's vital to understand both culture and climate as distinct but interconnected concepts. In IO psychology, the concept of climate emerged as an offshoot of organizational culture. Climate is more measurable and specific than culture, and is defined by how employees perceive the organization's policies, practices, and procedures. Climate is an individual-level concept, where each worker has their own perception, or psychological climate. If a collective perception shared by many members emerges, such as a shared belief in the organization's safety or service orientation, it forms what we call an organizational climate. However, if employees' perceptions are varied and not shared, the organization's climate can be considered weak or inconsistent. So how do culture and climate differ? Culture is typically studied using qualitative methods, such as case studies or interviews. It's concerned with long-established emergent identities of organizations, focusing more on the deep-seated values and beliefs, the who we are of an organization. Culture is more about the underlying values and assumptions embedded within the organization. Climate, on the other hand, is more psychological and is usually measured from individuals' perspectives. It deals with the observable manifestations of the culture and is typically studied using quantitative approaches like surveys. We can assess the strength of the climate and determine if it's shared among the members, which would define it as an organizational climate. So while culture is about deep-seated beliefs and values, climate is about how those beliefs and values are perceived and experienced by the employees on a day-to-day basis. In practice, the distinction between the two can sometimes blur. Some assessments developed to measure culture might be, in a technical sense, measuring climate. Nonetheless, both are essential to understanding the inner dynamics of an organization and how it shapes employee experience and behavior. How does climate fit into the organizational culture conversation? If we tweak the Hatch model I showed you earlier, you can think of climate as employees' understanding of the observable artifacts in the organization and what these artifacts signify. Let's say an organization has an environmental sustainability policy. That's their stance on going green. Employees might look at the policy and interpret it as a climate that supports environmentally friendly behavior. This interpretation then encourages employees to adapt the behaviors they see as consistent with that climate. In this case, it might prompt them to act more sustainably in their day-to-day work. You might be wondering, why does climate matter? In the last few decades, there's been a ton of research on climate, far more than on culture, because climate is much easier to define and measure. A classic review in 2003 found that climate influenced a range of organizational outcomes, including job performance, psychological well-being, withdrawal from the organization, organizational commitment, and job satisfaction. Let me give you a few examples to illustrate how climate influences organizations. A study by Andrew Neal, a professor here in the Center for Business and Organizational Psychology at UQ, and Mark Griffin demonstrated the power of a safety climate. They found that when an organization emphasized the importance of safety, it boosted individuals' motivation to act safely. Over time, this led to safer behavior and even a reduction in safety incidents. So a strong climate around safety had real, tangible results, in this case, fewer accidents. Another study attempted to change the safety climate through a communication strategy. As a result of this intervention, employees felt that safety had become more of a priority, which influenced their own behavior. Additionally, employees reported feeling less workload and experienced better teamwork, showing that a strong, positive climate can also have other benefits. Then there's the work done by Tom Norton, a former PhD student here at UQ, supervised by Stacy Parker, an associate professor in the Center for Business and Organizational Psychology. This work focused on environmental sustainability, or green climates. Organizations are increasingly trying to be more sustainable, not just because it's beneficial for the environment, but also because it can influence their employees' behaviors in a positive way. Their research showed that when organizations had clear policies around environmental sustainability and employees were aware of these policies, it fostered a green climate. Employees then internalized this climate and started acting in more environmentally friendly ways. So far, we've delved into some positive examples of climate in organizations, specifically safety climate and green climates. However, climate can also be harmful, potentially being a significant source of stress. A good example of this is the concept of an overwork climate. In an overwork climate, the central tenet that permeates the organization is the importance of consistent hard work. The perception that one needs to be in work mode continuously. Employees in such an environment perceive this focus on extensive work as the core value of the organization. This perception then influences their behavior, potentially leading to a phenomenon we refer to as workaholism. This is where employees are working excessively, often beyond standard working hours, extending into evenings, weekends, and personal time. This extreme work behavior can easily become unhealthy and dysfunctional. An interesting study on overwork climates examined the interplay between this climate and individual traits such as conscientiousness and self-efficacy. Normally, high self-efficacy and conscientiousness are seen as favorable traits. Conscientious individuals are thorough and diligent, and those with high self-efficacy have a firm belief in their abilities to execute tasks. However, in an overwork climate, these individuals turn out to be the most susceptible. Their inherent sense of duty and confidence in their capabilities make them particularly at risk of workaholism. Their desire to meet the perceived expectations of their work environment could steer them towards excessive work. So this presents a clear picture that specific climates can surface within teams and organizations that might inadvertently foster unhealthy or dysfunctional behaviors. So it's important for organizations to be vigilant about the kind of climate they're cultivating. The goal is to ensure a balance that promotes productivity and well-being rather than fostering extreme behaviors. As we wind down our discussion on organizational design and culture, let's recap what we've covered. We started with organizational design, dissecting its crucial elements, including formalization, centralization, departmentalization, and the span of control. We discussed how these components work to structure a company from the chain of command to the division of responsibilities. We then compared the two ends of the design continuum, organic versus mechanistic designs, considering how and when each design could be most beneficial. We then transitioned to organizational culture, covering the role it plays in shaping and driving an organization's collective behavior, decision-making, and overall performance. We looked at Sheen's structural model as a guide to understand the layered architecture of culture. We then considered the dynamic perspective offered by Hatch's model, which describes how culture is formed, maintained, and changed over time. Lastly, we considered the topic of climate, exploring its interplay with organizational culture. We analyzed how the perceived organizational policies, practices, and procedures influence employees' behaviors and attitudes, and we considered both the positive and negative effects that climates can have. These insights highlight the interconnections between organizational design, culture, and climate, emphasizing the critical role they play in shaping effective and adaptable organizations. That's it for this lecture. I'll see you all in the lecture debrief.